Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us tonight for the 5th lecture of this fall semester. Thank you for being here in midterm time. But let me start by recognizing and acknowledging that we are on the lands of the Peoria, Kaskaskia, Piankasa, Wea, Miami, Mascoutin, Odawa, Sauk, Meskwaki, Kickapoo, Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Chickasaw nations. These lands were the traditional territory of these native nations prior to their forced removal. These lands continue to carry the stories of these nations and their struggles for survival and identity. As a land-grant institution, the University of Illinois has a particular responsibility to acknowledge the peoples of these lands, as well as the histories of dispossession that have allowed for the growth of this institution for the past 150 years. We are also obligated to reflect on and actively address these histories and the role that this university has played in shaping them. This acknowledgement and the centering of Native peoples is a start as we move forward for the next 150 years. In the face of today's social and environmental urgencies, under the title Critical Practice, this fall's School of Architecture lecture series invites us to reflect on the evolving role of designers as critical agents in shaping equitable, resilient, and culturally grounded futures. Contributing practitioners and educators working across architecture, landscape, and urbanism activate design as a tool for critique, transformation, and care. Together, these voices sketch a field in motion, one that is actively reshaping what it means to practice today. With this in mind, it's my pleasure to turn the word to the director of the school, Francisco Rodriguez, who will be introducing our guest lecturer this evening, Mónica Ponce de León. Thank you.
Thank you, Sara. And thank you for organizing this fantastic lecture series. Welcome. It is a distinct pleasure to welcome Mónica Ponce de León to Plame Auditorium at the Illinois School of Architecture. Mónica is currently the Dean at Princeton University School of Architecture. She's a pioneering educator and award-winning architect who is deeply committed to architectural education. But I wanted to say something else about you because, and I would like to begin by stipulating that there are many members of our discipline who excel in practice. Know many of them, while others do so in academia. We know them as well. Some in research and some in service to the profession. Few of them are equally gifted in two of those categories, maybe three, but rarely does one encounter someone who can successfully traverse all four with proven results. Such is the case of Mónica. Dean Ponce de León builds bridges between academia and practice, underscoring the interdisciplinary nature of architecture by encouraging experimentation and critical thinking in the curriculum. As a dean and an educator, Mónica has emphasized the connections between scholarship, research, and creative practice. Ponce de León served as dean of the Taubman College of Architecture and Urban Planning at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor from 2008 to 2015, where she was also the Eliel Saarinen Collegiate Professor. Before her appointment at the University of Michigan, Mónica was a professor at Harvard Graduate School of Design, where she served on the faculty for 12 years. Ponce de León also has held teaching appointments at Northeastern, the Southern California Institute of Architecture, SCIARC, Rhode Island School of Design, RISD, and the Georgia Institute of Technology, where I did my undergraduate degree. She is widely recognized as a leader in the application of robotic technology to building fabrication. Building upon her work as director of the Digital Lab at Harvard, she developed a state-of-the-art student-run digital fabrication lab at the University of Michigan, integrating digital fabrication into the curriculum of the school. In large part because of her pioneering work, the use of digital tools is now commonplace in architecture schools across the country. Among her many prestigious honors, and the list is very long, Ponce de León has received the Cooper Hewitt National Design Award in Architecture from the Smithsonian National Design Museum, the Academic Award in Architecture from the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the USA Target Fellow in Architecture and Design from the United States Artists, and the Young Architects and Emerging Voices Awards from the Architectural League of New York. Her work has received over a dozen Progressive Architecture Awards, several awards from the American Institute of Architects, and numerous citations. She was also named a National Academician in recognition of her exceptional contributions to American art and architecture. The work of her award-winning interdisciplinary practice, MPdL Studio, ranges in scale from furniture to architecture, from urban design and infrastructure, with a focus on design integration, craft, detailing, and precision. Much of the studio's research is dedicated to an exploration of how to improve on contemporary modes of construction, investigating both industry standards as well as evolving technologies derived from digital manufacturing processes. Without further ado, please help me welcome Mónica Ponce de León to the Illinois School of Architecture.
I was gonna embarrass Francisco by calling him Mr. Director, but he asked me not to, and he did such a beautiful introduction that now I can't even be phony with you. So thank you, Francisco. I am a huge admirer of you, your work, what you've done in the school, so it really means a lot to me to be here today. So I'm thinking of the lecture a little bit as taking stock of what matters to me in the discipline. And I have been obsessed lately with trying to figure out what is it that we do as architects. And for me, what we do when we build is that we really partake in the construction of culture. But more importantly, I think we mess with time. And I'm going to sort of give you a series of episodes that hopefully give you a snapshot of what I mean by this, how architecture interfaces with time. It's not something we talk about, it's not something we teach necessarily. There have been very few books on this, but I think it's central to the discipline. I have always been very interested in the making of architecture, how we detail buildings, what are those materials that we put together, and putting them together in new and innovative ways. It took me to digital technology and digital fabrication, which for me was a big blind spot in the discipline when I became interested in it. And I have tried to do this through, I have pursued my interest through exhibition installations as well as full-scale constructions. And I think of it as all one and the same. So I think today architecture should be concerned with speed, and we should concern ourselves with things that might be very, very quick. When we did this gas station in Los Angeles, we had 9 months from the beginning of the project to the end. But of course, this is an object that you see when you're driving fast or when you're stuck in traffic, either one. It could be depending on the day. But we were asked to remodel this existing Arco station. So it's actually a remodeling project. And the code really put pressure on the character of the building. So we were required to actually have certain overhangs in relationship to each of the pumps. And that gave the peculiar shape to the canopy, as well as its relationship to two existing structures, which are these gigantic billboards. So the billboards actually are the main reason for the deformation of the canopy. So in order to respond to all these forces and to respond to them quickly, we decided to develop a module that could then be agglomerated into the canopy. So while each of the components might look different, they're actually part of the same family, and they're all derived from the same kind of module. So that piece is then understood almost as the generator of the system. And the intention when we were hired is that this was going to be a demonstration project, and that then this will repeat in other gas stations across North America. The module has the same number of components. All of them expand and contract depending on where you end up in the site and what forces you are responding. So on the one hand, we have sort of what is almost a normal canopy. Towards the edge, it gets squished because it's at the end of the site, and again, the property line is sort of putting pressure on it. Or towards the street, it becomes more of a billboard. Or it can also house where you pay for the gas. Now, while we were very concerned with speed, and we were very concerned with sort of the impression that the building leaves on you quickly, you're only there for a few minutes, we also were interested in the environmental impact of the gas station. I know it sounds like an oxymoron, but we wanted to somehow use the gas station, if it was going to be repeated throughout North America, as a test ground for how to deal with rainwater collection, even in an extreme desert weather like Los Angeles, but also that we could embed within the project ideas of remediating for the oil spills that inevitably happen when you are actually putting gas on your car. So this combination between something that is fast, that you drive by fast, and something that actually takes care of the site, takes care of the ground, is something that for me is important, not only in a little project like this, but perhaps in every project. Now, the truth is that architecture is fleeting. Most buildings have more than one life, and there is a loose fit between the program that the building is built for and how it's used over time. So when we were commissioned to do the Fleet Library, when we were commissioned to do the library for Rhode Island School of Design, Fleet Bank, which none of you know anymore because it's disappeared, gave the space to Rhode Island School of Design, and it became known as the Fleet Library. And you know, this is a space that is in the National Register of Historic Places. It has amazing architecture, and all I could think about when we got the commission is, all I have to do is to not mess it up. So how do you go into a space and not mess it up? I mean, we were really thinking of temporary structures, temporary pavilions, things that at one point in history could actually be dismantled and taken away. This coincided with me being at Georgia Tech as the first venture-led professor, and I was doing a series of experiments with students where we were using digital fabrication technology as a way of working out things like, can you build something without scaffolding? Can you use the technology to produce joinery that allows you to put two things together easily and produce complex forms? And I was looking for ways, this is a restaurant that was built around that time. I was looking for ways to take those lessons learned in academia and then bring them into commercial and institutional projects. So the Fleet Library really came out of this desire to not touch the space, but we had to touch it. The library needed program. The library had more program that the space could hold. So we came up with the idea of doing two pavilions that float in the space, one holding sort of noisy functions like Xerox machines and group study, et cetera, and the other one being the circulation island where you check out and return books. And the pavilions sit freely in the space and really welcome the students into their functions. We thought of the library as a gigantic living room to the dormitories above. So we really designed it as a place where you could engage on multiple scales. For example, on top of one of the islands, you can access it and be really close to the capitals, be really close to the covering. So we're also offering a different experience of the space that was never intended. Now, in order to be able to build these I call them temporary, but the Rhode Island School of Design does not think of them as temporary. In order to build these pavilions, we needed to prefabricate them off-site and then bring them and build them inside so that we could coordinate with the academic calendar. So we convinced Rhode Island School of Design that we should digitally fabricate them. This is a time where every shop in America already was digital, but architects acted like they didn't know it. And we invented a new way of thinking about shop drawings. There are no shop drawings for the project. Instead, what we did was a manual of assembly. All of the components of the pavilions have the same number of pieces, and we guide those who are assembling it into how to assemble. One of the things that is, of course, interesting about digital fabrication is that the tools, the machines don't care what shape they cut, but you have to worry about who is assembling it because, of course, it's assembled by us, it's assembled by people. So understanding that translation was an essential part of the project. We also realized that because Rhode Island School of Design has students for 4 or 5 years, that we had a dedicated audience, which is a very different kind of public. It's not a public like a public that goes to a museum once in a lifetime. This is the kind of public that comes back and comes back and comes back. So we were interested in using digital technology as a way of engaging the human body. So we decided to not design for the average, like in graphic standards. All of you are probably familiar with this. Instead of designing for the average, we decided to design for the range. So all of our benches are different heights. All of our benches are different widths. Some of our cubicles accommodate wheelchairs. And in some cases, we even were very didactic, from the tallest standing male height to the lowest seated female. So the intent was that digital technology actually allowed us to design. The digital technology in combination with the length of time allowed us to design for many as opposed to the average few. Digital technology also became an opportunity for me to live out one of my fantasies. I am sure all of you are familiar with this image. This is the La Bibliothèque Sainte-Geneviève by Labrousse in Paris. And I have always been fascinated with the idea that the authors of the books are inscribed on the facade itself, that the word becomes the decoration of the building. So we ask the librarians to come up with names of artists. We knew that we could afford 20,000 characters as a way of perforating one of the pavilions, which was the heaviest in the space. We developed an alphabet, and the librarians obliged, and they gave us a really nice list that represented not only world artists, but also faculty within Rhode Island School of Design. And then something really lovely is that they played a joke on us. So the name of everyone in the team is in the library, but also I was pregnant at the time. The name of my 2 children are on the walls of the library, as well as my 2 dogs, which is pretty sweet. So if you walk around and you see a Laszlo, it's not Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, it's my dog. So while the premise of the building was one of transition, one of building something quick, because it has to be built over the summer, and it was built on modules, by the way, and they arrived on a Monday, and by the time I came to the site on Wednesday, they were done. I missed the assembly. So while it was predicated in this idea of something that could be quickly assembled but also taken apart, the cultural framework that it produced, I would argue, is equally important. Now, if we think of the word time, we also need to think about not just quick or long, not only passing and fleeting or long-lasting, but we also have to think of the mundane sort of passing of time during the day. And this is something that architecture, I think, does extremely well. We are all aware of the time of day by how a building is designed, and in particular by how light is accessed, and whether we understand the change of the light from day to night. This is, I think, particularly important when thinking about access to light as a commodity in workplaces. So the American workspace is actually predicated in light as being a commodity. This is a prototypical early 20th century office building where all of the offices of the executives are in the perimeter and the support staff is in the center with no access to natural light and instead afforded quite a lot of artificial lighting. This is a prevalent model. This is, for example, the Johnson Wax building by Frank Lloyd Wright. Same idea, except here is double height and the executives are looking down at the support staff. So when I was asked to do this very small, low-budget office building in Logan, Ohio, I became obsessed with this idea of no corner office and that light somehow should be evenly distributed. Now, distributing light evenly is actually an impossibility because you are either close to a window or you're not, or you are close to the edge of the building or you're not. And this is particularly difficult when you're dealing with a very cheap building. There's no other way, low budget building, there's no way to describe it, but also one that is facing west, meaning that the primary source of light is one that will really be intense at a certain time of day. So what I decided to do was to create an open plate that acts as a free plan where everybody's sort of the same. So engineers are sitting next to support staff. So there is not a hierarchy of creating offices. And I was very lucky to be with a client that got excited about this idea. It fit the ethos of how he thought of his company. This is the upper level. And then in the lower level, we actually created offices that needed to be offices, like accounting, for example. You don't want all the numbers out to be in the open, or the research branch that has secrets, et cetera, et cetera. So those actually get proper offices in the lower level. So for the West, we design a brise-soleil facade, and the facade is calibrated very specifically in relationship to the furniture behind it, so that no direct light actually falls on a desk, so that everybody has sort of the same level of even light. And in the lower level, it bounces off walls. And it's interesting to see how the building changes dramatically throughout the day. Now, for the interior, we have a combination of structure and systems that penetrate through that upper level into the lower level. And most importantly, we created a distributed system of skylights, solar tubes, some of you might be familiar with this, that bring light not only to that upper floor, but also penetrate all the way through to the lower level. And what this did is actually quite remarkable, because you actually have an even natural light throughout the space. In fact, at the beginning, it was a little too intense, and they had to adjust the solar tubes to lower it a little bit because it was just too bright, which for me was a surprise. When they asked me at the beginning, how much you want to adjust it? I said, none. I want a lot of light. And then it was too bright. So the idea then, of course, being of a very distributed system that brings light equally throughout. And the hypostyle hall, then, again, an ode to the Johnson Wax, is one that creates a lot of variety. The structural system is of one size, mechanical systems out of another, and then the solar tubes, which sometimes are combined with mechanical systems out of another. And this kind of distributed system that brings together different logics creates enough variation that it pushes the different services, that pushes all the different desks and all the different workstations together in a very intense relationship. So it's impossible to segregate and to have folks that have a better spot than others. And what this has done in exchange is create a culture of collaboration and a culture of exchange. I have to say I also like the idea of doing a hypostyle hall where the columns are heavy as opposed to skinny. So if we understand that architecture has a loose fit between program and its form, meaning when a building gets started, who occupies the building, how the building is used, et cetera, we know it's going to change. Then can we design for that change? Can we understand the building as one that can transform over time? This, to me, this is a question that actually has preoccupied me quite a bit. We just opened an exhibition at Princeton called The House Transformed, where I ask almost 50 architects to imagine homes that are no longer the single family home. And the idea of transformation is one that is essential to the exhibition. This is my own entry into that exhibition. And what I was interested in was thinking differently about the suburban home and thinking of the suburban home not as for the quote-unquote nuclear family, but a suburban home that could actually accept multiple versions of family and could definitely change over time. That music is not mine. Although I like it, we can leave it as background. Very present in my thinking. So I should have said, I'm sorry, when I talked about the corner office, I mean, architecture for me is always very personal. It's difficult for me to think of things without tying it to people that I know. My mom was an administrative assistant since I was little. So, you know, my mom was one of those people that never had access to natural light, right? So I've always been sort of interested in that relationship between architecture and everyday through the lens of my own family. The reason I'm telling the story is because this is Elliot Noyes' house. Elliot Noyes is an architect that worked for IBM. He's the inventor of this typewriter called the Selectric. For those of you who do not know, the Selectric has a ball instead of the little sticks of typewriters. So as a little girl, my mom got a Selectric at the office, and as a little girl, I used to play with her Selectric. And then I become an architect, and then I realized he's an architect, and this is his house for his family. So I had very present Elliot Noyes' home. I never thought I would design a house for my family, and here I was designing a house for my family. And Elliot Noyes decided to do this sort of house in the woods with a lot of glass, a lot of reflectivity, and this is one of the bases for the project. The other basis for the project is a house that I lived in Michigan that was in 2 floors. And the house I'm going to show you is basically taking this house. This is a house by a Michigan architect called Bob Metcalf, who was chair and then dean of the school at Michigan. For those of you who are from Michigan, you probably know his work. The new house I'm going to show you is basically these 2 floors into one, made into one floor. So the first move was to not open the house to the street, to have the house very sort of close to the street in the tradition of providing as much of privacy as possible, but also so that you could actually change the interior as much as possible. And then I became interested in sort of the paradigms of the home. The home has always been used as a repository for architectural theory and also for architectural form invention. Think of Le Corbusier's 7 points of architecture being tested in Villa Savoye. And I became interested in sort of 2 modes. I always like both and. So on the one hand, the free plan of the glass house. On the other hand, the poché of Palladio, and how both are insufficient really for structuring life. One is too open, one is too close, and they say different things about us as humans. And I began to think of alternatives like Rietveld, who designed a house for Mrs. Schroeder and her kids, single mom like me, and how that house actually transformed every day. Every day they took these walls and closed them and made rooms out of it. So I thought, is it possible to reimagine the American single-family home in this way? And I thought, no, of course not. This is crazy. This is a very rarefied example. But I think there's still lessons that we could learn from it. So I set out to design a house that would very much operate as a free plan with a great deal of exchange between members of the family. But I also decided that it was important to embed within it the possibility of change. So the house has these oversized doors that are 5.5 feet wide, that when they close, they blend into the paneling system of the home, and they become walls. So the house is intended to oscillate between free plan and poché over the course of the day, but also welcome change over time. So it was important to me that the house be one story so you can grow old in it, but also that one story could revolve around a courtyard. I'm from Caracas, Venezuela. The courtyard home is one of the prototypes that we look towards. And I thought of the courtyard as one of these floating objects of the free plan. And it very much interrupts the flow of space, but also it reflects the outside by reflecting trees, by reflecting the passing of clouds. So what makes this free plan, what makes these objects is those immovable components like the bathrooms and the kitchen, very traditional free plan in that way. But these objects push through the roof and open up skylights as a way of stealing light to those cores, but also as a way of creating a landscape on the roof, who for me was important, brought that green from the ground to the roof. So even though the house is occupying a big chunk of the site, I recreated, let's say, the green in the roof itself. And you can barely see it, but this is actually one of the skylights, which becomes then a mound on the ceiling, on the roof. Now, if the house is intended to change over the course of the day, it's also intended to change in the long run. When the kids go off to college, you can close the doors and make this into rental units. All the closets are pre-plumbed to receive kitchenettes, with the intention that what is now a side door will then become a front door. And in fact, the plans have multiple versions and multiple ways of being subdivided and occupied over time, to the point that you could have 2 units sharing a living room, or you could have a master bedroom, and you can have 1 bedroom and a smaller bedroom with a living room, and so on. So I've been struggling with how to represent this, how to represent this oscillation between free plan and poché, but also how to represent the passing of time. I would love a conversation about this at the end of the lecture, whether this is one successful way of doing it, this sort of layering of time in the drawing itself. Now, of course, one of the most important things that we do as architects is to remember. And very few of us ever get an opportunity to work on a project that is intended to remember. I was really fortunate that the Dallas Morning News newspaper asked Stoss Landscape Architecture to work on developing a memorial at Daly Plaza. And then Christos called me and said, would you like to collaborate in this project? And I'm really grateful. And what is amazing about the project is that not only do we have Daly Plaza, which is where JFK was assassinated, right next to it, there is a park called Martyrs Park, where 3 black men were lynched in the history of Dallas. And the park is really severed from the rest of the city. This is how you walk to get to the park. You're going through a horrible underpass. And currently, everybody is driving over where JFK was shot. So the project intends to stitch together both parks, where horrible events have taken place, as a way of making sure that we can have a conversation and making sure that this history is not hidden or eradicated. So So we carefully decided to close the road to vehicles and only open it to pedestrians, but also develop a boardwalk of sorts that brings you up and then around. And the boardwalk then transforms so that events can take place. In some cases, you know, sort of a green auditorium of sorts, doing very little to intervene on the ground itself, where JFK was shot. Currently, they put an X with a chalk on the ground, and then it gets erased as it rains, etc., and then they go back and put an X on the ground, which is sort of incredibly disrespectful, in my opinion. So when we designed the public space, we decided to put it lightly over a railroad infrastructure, and we decided that the columns will be slightly tenuous and unstable looking, again, because this is sort of an unstable place. And Chris came up with this fantastic idea of having the trees lean. And what I love about it is that, of course, as the trees grow, they're going to straighten themselves out. So for us, this is a place where we look back at history, but hopefully have a positive outlook. And this is Marty's Park, which is actually, this is a competition that was won by an artist, and I think he's done a beautiful piece. And our project encompasses both sides. So time in Spanish is really a beautiful word because it means not just 8 o'clock in the morning, or this year versus next year. Time also refers to weather. And I was very interested in the idea of our buildings also registering this atmosphere that happens around us. So when I was commissioned by the city of Pompano Beach to do a cultural center and library, 2 different projects, media arts center and library, 2 different projects in this site, I thought that it would be an opportunity to really use the building as a way of registering what we all experience together as humans, which is the dramatic changes of weather in the course of the day or in the course of the year. The existing library is in the center of a neighborhood that is primarily Caucasian, and the city very wisely decided to move the library and add the Media Arts Center to a place that is really a cultural intersection on the site. We had 2 clients, and the 2 clients only had in common, the Media Arts Center and the library only had in common that they had a grant for technology. That was the only thing they had in common. They were never in the room at the same time. And it really became a negotiation with 2 people that were never together, 2 groups that were never together, that had completely different aspirations. The library, for example, wanted the entry in the back towards the parking. The cultural center was horrified, and they wanted the entry in the front towards the bus stop. And at the end, what we decided is that it was important to do a building that could bring all these forces and all these interests together, as opposed to sort of put them in contradiction with each other. So we designed a building with 2 entrances. We designed a building with a breezeway, and a breezeway that then opened up into a courtyard so that you could see the 2 doors. The building also opens up at the ground as much as possible and then brings you up to the upper levels as a way of gaining space. So we thought almost as a Janus head, 2 intertwining snakes that said different things at the lower and upper level depending on the program and depending, quite honestly, on the time of day. So for instance, while the courtyard is porous and open, the reading room climbs over the breezeway as a way of providing a quiet space for seniors. This was very important to seniors, while the ground level is really given up to kids that are quite loud and quite noisy. And we're still related the 2, but it created a certain level of acoustical separation that allowed the reading room to succeed. And then also in the upper level is the black box towards the street, which is quite active at night. It's the Media Arts Center, so they have events on the black box almost weekly. So the building itself becomes a register of the change over time. And depending on the weather conditions, the glass changes in character from being very reflective to being almost transparent, to then really taking that sort of color of the sky itself. But also at night, while the ground has been active during the day, at night is really when the upper level really shines and takes hold. And we wanted to make sure that that was something that was really clear and visible as the building changed from the function of the library during the day to the function of the cultural center at night. And I have to say that it has been exciting to see, and I wish I had better photos of the building, but it's been exciting to see how the building really reflects the sky, and how the building has become a cultural magnet for the community. One of the things that the community really asked us for was to not do an international style building and to not do a Mediterranean style building, and they had a fight about neither one, please. And it's been rewarding for me to see that the language of the building is one that Pompano Beach is super excited about. Okay, the last project. Thank you for being patient. So, I'm also interested in sort of this idea that we can recreate an atmosphere within a building. Again, that we can construct within, that architects themselves can actually do something that is akin to weather or akin to nature. And when I was commissioned to do an atrium space in New York City, I thought it was an opportunity to visit this as a topic. This is a film still from a film by Alexander Korda. It's from 1936, and it's titled The Shape of Things to Come. There were no atriums at the time, so he's imagining this completely on his own. And look at this. I mean, it's all of the elements that you see in atrium hotels. You can see an open elevator. This is a glass elevator. You can see, bridges and balconies with green, trees coming up the different tiers. It's really, really similar to, for example, poor man's hotels that have the exact same elements. I've always wanted to know if poor man actually knew of Alexander Korda's films. And these are all the poor man hotels that I'm amazed. When I was in Atlanta, when I lived in Atlanta, I just was completely enamored with them. And I went to the one in LA when I was very young with my family, and I just think that they're amazing environments. But of course, I did not have good luck, and this is the atrium hotel that I was given to remodel. You can see it's quite ugly. So it's like, what do you do with this, So the excitement of being commissioned to do an atrium in a hotel really faded away when I realized it's an embassy suite. So but it was very well located, right across from the Potato Famine Monument in Manhattan. This is a view from the hotel to the Potato Famine. So next to the ferry station, it's an area of Manhattan very well traveled in Battery Park, and connected with a series of public spaces like this beautiful arcade by Scott Cohen. The project also had a fantastic public mandate. In the city, in Battery Park, all the public spaces have to be elevated 20 feet from the ground because of flooding. But at the same time, they have to be public, meaning that they have to be open as a right-of-way for the public. You can't close the door and close it at night, which is great. So the idea that this will become a passage for the public was, for me, something super exciting and interesting. But this is how it was when I found it. You can see how a wall, escalators, who is going to go up there? Nobody. And this is what it looked like when I went for the first time. Can somebody tell me where the public right-of-way is? Because I can't find it. Can somebody find it? I can't find it. So the city only requires 5 feet wide public right-of-way, which I thought, how can 5 feet be public? A hallway in a house is, can be 5 feet. So the first move that we did, let me back up. The other component of the project was that the atrium was interrupted by a multiplex, a movie theater. That was putting a lot of pressure on the space as well. So the first thing that we did was to open up the space under the multiplex and really make it public. And you can see how we put grand stairs, we made the elevators visible in Alexander Korda, and made the access to the elevators really like public and loud, so you wouldn't have to like go fishing for them. So sort of like Piazza de España complex in my part of really like grand up and then grand down. So we went from something like this with the little escalators and nothing else to something like this where at least visually it welcomes you. Now, the big sort of elephant in the room was, of course, that multiplex that really like was stuffed into the atrium. What do you do with that? It's not a normal atrium. And on top of it, it's not just any multiplex. The previous owner of the hotel had actually commissioned Soluit to do a Soluit drawing, it's called drawing, over the multiplex. Now, when I originally was interviewed for the project, I'm going to confess this, and I'm ashamed of it, but I'll tell you. They interviewed me for the project, and the client says, what will you do with the Soluit? And I say, I will just get rid of it. Which in retrospect, I am so embarrassed, I cannot believe I did that. And the client said, no, we're keeping it. And then thankfully, the clients said, okay, I like your work. I want you, he commissioned 5 different people to do 5 different projects, and he said, but don't get rid of the Soluit. So, which is challenging, right? So my starting point was, let's get rid of the Soluit. Again, I'm horrified. I'm glad that I had a good client and that he didn't let me be a bad architect. But then I started thinking, okay, what do you do with it? So I started thinking of sort of veiling, screening, how do you create a screen? How do you veil it, but in a three-dimensional way? Sort of the difference between this kind of proscenium and something more like Cirque du Soleil that is more three-dimensional. And then I started realizing that it was an opportunity to sort of capture an atmosphere into the space. Again, in every project, one sort of tries to scratch an itch. And I have always been enamored with this project by Diller Scofidio. This is, I call it the cloud, that I actually don't know the official name for the project. And I actually happened by chance to see it in person in Switzerland. And this is a temporary structure that they did in a lake in Switzerland. It's a cloud, and it's sort of amazing because you walk into this cloud. You, of course, cannot build this in a building. But I thought that maybe it was an opportunity to really inject what I came to call the veils into the space and have this sort of element that floats and fills the atrium. And we became interested in how these veils are shaped and given structure. So we have what we call the lower rings, which then begin to play with the Soluit, and I hope that they keep good company with the Soluit. And they are highly calibrated so that they help organize the space and they help unveil the Soluit depending on the point of view. but also they play with the upper structure in the atrium, and they actually take clues from an existing skylight in the eastern side of the space. And then these are just different studies of how they unwrap and unveil as you go through. They come down, and sometimes they come down below eye level as you go down the steps. But also they are intended to produce an experience as you walk in the upper balconies. The balconies were modified. We replaced the drywall balconies with shaped Korean, actually, balconies, and the shape of the balcony is intended to direct your view towards the lower level, again, so that you are experiencing the veils at different levels. They produce, as you move, the effect as if it's almost like raining inside. They are made of a translucent fiber that is impossible to photograph, but also begin to create a space in the upper level that allows for the cleaning basket for the skylights to penetrate it. Again, keeping good company with the soul silhouette. And then I hate open elevators, but I wanted the elevators to be part of the experience. So we actually did a perforated mesh that allows you to look out, and then you actually don't see the technology of the elevator from the atrium itself. I hate all of those professional movies the architects do. This was done by a student at the University of Michigan with a handheld, and I think he did a fantastic job. Also his choice of music. These are the elevators on the left. One of my favorite stories is that one of the times that I went to the hotel, I stay in the hotel when I go to Manhattan. One of the times I stayed, I check in, the people behind the counter were like, oh my God, we have to tell your story. And they told me a story of a kid that was checking in with his mom, and the kid said, oh, mom, where is Spider-Man? Where is Spider-Man? And that for me was like the best. So thank you so much. And I know that I went over, but I would love questions if possible.
Yes, of course. Any questions in the room? Thank you so much. Okay.
Hello. Thank you, Professor, for that wonderful talk. And I was just so intrigued by your project of the Daily Plaza,
Of the what?
the where you showed in, I think it's called the Daily Plaza or the Dealey
Daily
Plaza.
Plaza,
Yeah.
yes. Yes.
And I was wondering if you could expand on, I mean, when I looked at that aerial view, what I saw is that you are basically like turning a non-place into a place in a sense that, to me, an American highway intersection has always been a non-place. It's quite the, and you were proposing quite the antithesis to it by making it a publicly accessible pedestrian space. So if you could expand on that, that would be wonderful.
That was very much the intention. So to me, so my thesis in school was the role of infrastructure in the production of public spaces. And this to me is a really good example of infrastructure that is gets on the way of producing public space. The first time I went to Daily Plaza was maybe 20 years ago. And I took a taxi, I guess, at the time, and I drove through it. And as I'm driving through it, all of a sudden I realized I know the place because we've seen the videos so many times, right? We've seen film, we've seen it so many times, it's in our minds. And I'm from South America, I'm from Venezuela, and I still had it very vivid in my mind. So I'm driving in this taxi, and this is like, again, many years ago, and I'm like, wait, where am I? And then I realized, oh my God, isn't this where JFK was assassinated? And the driver told me, yes, in fact, we just drove over where he was assassinated. And at that time, I was already horrified. So yeah, infrastructure, the idea that you don't even have respect for what is considered to be one of sort of the most horrific moments in American history, and a president that is revered and that you can just drive through it, to me is sort of shocking. But equally shocking is the way that the park on the other side of the railroad tracks has been neglected, finally got funding, finally got a memorial, but it's impossible to access it. So one, you're accessing it all the time, but just driving through it and desecrating it, if you wish, is probably a term that I would use. The other one, you make it really hard to get to. So one has too much access, the other one has no access. So the project really became about creating access and creating in a way that is a public space and that people will decide. We really, honestly, we thought a lot about school groups. We thought about school groups were our primary mode of thinking about it, not tourists, although there'll be tourists, of course, but that was not what we were interested in. We were interested in the notion that you can create spaces where there can be conversation. And we thought that school groups that will come and visit both sides and have a conversation about violence in America, that will have conversation about negative history that we need to discuss, that we need to really sort through. That's how we thought about it. And we thought of groups in different sizes. So we have sort of an intimate class of maybe 12 and a bigger spaces that are more for 20, but also somebody can come on their own and reflect on their own and still be comfortable. So.
Hello. It was a privilege to watch the lecture. I was really curious about, there are a lot of isms in architecture. There is deconstructivism, parametricism, and I've heard a lot about this, especially from Professor Hemingway. He was talking about how all three of you were sitting, you, Zaha, and Professor Hemingway, and suddenly a call
I'm having
came.
difficulty with the sound. It's not you, I think it's the sound system. Let's try it again.
Okay. Yeah. My voice is pretty bad.
It's not the volume, it's like blaring here. Oh. Yeah. It's not you, it's the sound system, it's like echoing or something.
Yeah, I was talking about, we have seen a lot of isms that...
Isms?
Yeah, isms that have come up in architecture. We have talked vastly about
Like constructivism.
deconstruction, deconstructivism, and then parametricism. And Professor Hemingway jokingly told about this a lot of times, that you, Zaha and Professor Hemingway were sitting there and someone called and you gave an interview about deconstructionism. So when you approached a lot of these projects, and the form of a lot of this project is very peculiar to different projects and different scales.
Yeah, it's great.
So when I look at this project, for example, you see the form being very different from the housing project that I saw, the single story project, and also the office
house.
project where the light was coming in. So I believe you approach each and every project in a different way, but do you also look at it from a broad perspective of how you define this, or is
That's a
it?
great question. I have an allergy towards signature. Like, I don't like the idea of a signature, and I become interested in multiple things, and I want to test different things. So at the beginning of my career, people thought of our work as aggregation, and we were in every book about aggregation, every exhibition about aggregation. So I went and I did a smooth project, just to resist the label of aggregation. So I do like variety, and if I can do two things and collapse them, I'm happy doing two things and collapsing them. But by the same token, I do think that one thing that is common in all of the projects is a certain idea of deformation, that you can see sort of the standard and how the standard is being deformed. That's something that I think is common to them. I want it to be culturally recognizable. Like, I still want a house to look like something that you recognize almost as a house. But I also like the idea of deforming it. So in the case of the house, the roof comes down so that you can see the green from the park across the street. I didn't say this, but there is a park across the street that is quite public, and that's why we have the facade, so you cannot see into the house from the park for privacy. So I do like this notion, like the columns. I do a hypostyle hall, but then they're fat columns, right? So, and as a heavy-set woman myself, I thought that was really funny. So anyway, so I do think that one of the things that is common to the work is recognizability. I can call it something like hypostyle hall, but then it's deformed. And you wonder, wait, what? Really? That's a hypostyle hall? The two columns are kissing. Is that a hypostyle hall or not? So yeah. So I do avoid signature, but all the work has in common an interest in deformation.
Thank you again for your lecture. I have a question, perhaps to expand a little bit more on this idea of the palimpsest. And you talked about it in kind of your drawing, but also in this project here where you're layering sort of ideas and history. And in a school, in architecture school, we always teach about kind of doing site context and understanding the history and understanding the culture and understanding these sort of layers that are both in architecture and urban conditions. But how do we not romanticize this idea of the palimpsest and actually make it be a meaningful sort of process tool that allows us to actually come with to a better form than just simply sort of reflecting on it and highlighting perhaps pieces of it, but actually make it be a sort of architecture process?
I'm not interested in palimpsest. I don't think I use the word, and I don't think I've ever used the word. I'm not interested in it. I'm actually quite, even though I may like to bring together two different strands, like Freehouse and Pochet together, I'm actually very interested in certain prototypes. At the end of the day, I'm a typology person. I like typology, and I like to understand it as a cultural register, and then I like to take it and modify it to sort of include everything that was left out. So the case of the house, you're confusing a drawing technique with the design of the house. So the house is pretty stable. It has these boxes that are the bathrooms, and then it has these doors that move. And depending on the moment in time, whether it's during the day or across years, some doors will remain fixed as walls and some won't, right? But I don't think of that as palimpsest. I think of that as something that can transform from point A to point B, to point C to point D, but it's quite intentional. I'm not interested personally, I'm not interested in being sort of the register of the geography of a particular site or the cultural contingencies of a particular site. That I'm not so interested in. I hope that answers the question. I'm more intentional. I'm like, I didn't explain the house very well because the first drawing, we call it the mortgage drawing. To get a mortgage in America, you have to have 3 bedrooms. It's very difficult to get a mortgage for a 2-bedroom. It's almost impossible to get a mortgage for a 1-bedroom. You have to have 3 bedrooms to get a mortgage. Isn't that amazing? Anyways, it's true. So the first drawing, we call it the mortgage drawing, right? And then the city of Princeton allows you to have 1 ADU. So one of those units is legal. The others would actually be illegal. So there are cultural contingencies and there are sort of zoning issues embedded in the project, but I wouldn't necessarily think of it as palimpsest. So, sure.
Okay, is it working?
Yes.
Hi, sorry. So my family is also from Caracas, Venezuela, and my mom is an architect, and in a lot of her designs, she also implements patios as a central point of structure. So my question is kind of, do you know other cultures or architects that are implementing that into their design as well? And how could we better implement that into new spaces?
The patio is everywhere in the Mediterranean and everywhere in the Caribbean and in many other cultures. I think it's very universal. In my case, I incorporated it because I'm from Caracas and I wanted that scale. But it's a cold weather, not a warm weather, so it's glass. So there had to be that, that translation. We slide them and open it, but still glass. So I think it's very universal. And I think it's everywhere. So Clara Sola Morales just gave a lecture at the School of Architecture, and she showed this house that had many patios, actually, which was exciting to see. She multiplied it. So yeah. Yes.
Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. My question is kind of zoomed out, knowing that your work employed digital fabrication when it was very cutting edge. And my question is 2-part. First, what were some of the challenges and opportunities of using something that was unknown to many clients, to many people, and you managed to create...
Zero challenge. So I'm going to demystify digital fabrication in 30 seconds for you. So digital fabrication has been around since the 50s. By the 1990s, when I became interested in digital fabrication, every millwork shop in America already had digital fabrication. All I did was realize, crap, we're not talking about this in school. We're so obsessed with softwares. We were like all around Katia, the gas station that I showed, we purchased Digital Project from Gary's office to do it. That was Digital Project. We were so obsessed with softwares that we forgot or didn't pay attention to the revolution that was happening in the construction industry regarding fabrication. So my interest in digital fabrication was more of a catch-up. And the reason I realized it is because my first project ever, which was a chapel that I didn't show, when we got the shop drawings from the fabricator, it was like no shop drawings I've ever seen. Generally, before digital fabrication came on the scene, you will give your drawings to the fabricator and they will regurgitate them back to you. These guys actually drew everything and they rounded every corner because they were using it with a CNC router, right? So I'm looking at these drawings and I'm like, why? And I worked for a mill shop before I went to architecture school. So I'm like, why are these guys rounding everything? So I went to the shop and the guy's like, because all of our tools are digital, we're routing everything. We're taking your digital files and we're translating them into routing files. So the library was extremely easy to do. We couldn't have done it if it wasn't with digital fabrication, and it was effortlessly to convince them. I said to them, mill workshops already have the technology. We are going to eliminate the shop drawing. We figured out how they could take the liability without producing shop drawings. It got produced over a summer, fabricated, bam, 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 very cheap, $120 a square foot. So zero. So, we like to believe that we invent everything and that we put everything on the table. it was already out there. All I did was recognize, oh crap, this is already out there and we're not talking about it. So, yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for answering my first question. Now, my follow-up is about
Sorry.
the new wave of design methods and probably fabrication methods in architecture. And how do you see that playing a part in architectural roles like AI, other robotic fabrication, or things that are not necessarily as easy as digital fabrication in a shop to scale up?
I mean, I think robotics is gonna have the same kind of transition. This is why I started on robotics right away in the 90s, because I thought it's gonna have the exact same transition that CNC routers did. Very quickly, we're gonna see robotics not only cutting complex parts, but also assembling them. I think it's gonna happen. It's happening in the automobile industry, it's gonna happen in the building industry. I think I think we need to accept it, and I don't see it as I see it as similar to what has already happened many times over. I'm a little less positive about building information modeling. I actually find building information modeling a bit of a fallacy. I find architect's office doing the modeling and the engineering firms sort of putting the stuff into our model, right? And it's taking a lot of hours in offices to do building information modeling. It's not that great and it's not that helpful. And then I see the contractors not opening the model. So you have on the one hand, the General Service Administration requiring this. On the other hand, the architects doing 90% of the job, of the work, because we have to create the big model that then everybody drops things in. And then the contractors don't even look at it. So I don't know. The more that I practice and the more that I engage in building information modeling, the more I lose faith in it. It sounds great, right? But I think it disadvantages the medium and small firm. The contractors are not looking at it, so what is it that we're doing there? So I don't know. I'm less positive on that side. So, okay. Well, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Another round of applause.